I will start with Mr. David Matas. Dr. David Matas is the international human rights lawyer and also co-founder of International Coalition to End Transplant Abuse in China. He has written a number of books and publications on the forced organ harvesting issue in China, and he'll speak about the significance of the Bill S-204. So, David.
Thank you. The purpose of this press conference is to call on the House of Commons to pass second and third reading of Bill S-204 by unanimous consent before the House of Commons breaks for its summer adjournment. The bill, in a nutshell, makes complicity in organ transplant abuse abroad a crime and bans entry to Canada of those complicit in the crime. Anyone physically in Canada who was complicit in the crime abroad could be prosecuted. An earlier version of this proposed legislation was originally introduced in response to a report David Kilgore and I wrote in 2006, documenting mass killing of practitioners of the spiritually based set of practices Falun Gong for their organs, used for transplants, both for transplant tourists and either wealthy or well-connected Chinese. Our report noted that the mass killing was a hugely profitable enterprise and not a crime, either inside or outside China. In response to the increasingly overwhelming and unanswerable evidence of this abuse, there's been a worldwide movement to close the legislative gap which grants immunity to foreign complicity in this abuse. Despite the general consensus in Canada of the need for this sort of legislation, the Canadian effort has been mired in parliamentary procedure. This legislation has been proposed to Parliament now 6 times. Bill C-500 in February 2008 by Liberal Boris Wisniewski, Bill C-381 in May 2009, also by Boris Wisniewski, 561 in December 2013 by Liberal Erwin Cutler, Bill C-350 in April 2017 by Conservative Garnet Genuis, Bill S-240 in October 2017 by Senator Salma Abedin, and Bill S-204 September 2020, also by Senator Salma Abedin. Bill S-240, the first bill of Senator Abedin, passed all 3 readings in the Senate unanimously and went to the House of Commons. The House of Commons then passed all 3 readings of the bill unanimously, the third reading being April 2019. However, because there were major differences between the bill the House passed and the bill the Senate passed, the Senate had to reenact the House version of the bill. The October 2009 election intervened, dissolving the Parliament. In the current Parliament, the Senate reenacted as Bill S-204 at all 3 stages. Reenacted the bill at all 3 stages. Unanimously, the version of the bill passed in the previous Parliament by the House of Commons. However, because the unanimous approval by the House of Commons of the current version of the bill occurred in the previous Parliament, the bill has to be reapproved by the present Parliament. Now we are facing the possibility of a fall election, which would mean the dissolution of the current Parliament. If that happens before the bill passes the House of Commons, the current bill would die on their order paper. The bill would then have to go again through all stages in both the Senate and the House of Commons. Now, this manner of proceeding is both a tragedy and a farce. It is a tragedy for those being killed for their organs and their families. The behavior of Parliament is a farce. No one in the current Parliament has expressed any opposition to this bill. What we are asking for here is only a few seconds of House of Commons time so that the apparent unanimous support that the bill has in the House of Commons can be formally recorded, and the bill, 15 years after our report noting the legislative gap, 13 years after the bill was first introduced into Parliament, can finally become law. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. David Matas. And next will be Honourable David Kilgore. Mr. Kilgore is the former MP and Secretary of State for Asia Pacific when he was MP, and he's also a co-founder of International Coalition to End Transplant Abuse in China. And with David Matas, they've done investigation into the forced organ harvesting in China since 2006. And Honourable Kilgore will be speaking about the recent UN response to the forced organ harvesting issue in China. Please.
Thank you, Maria. If anybody doesn't have the press release that was issued by the organ harvest experts, or the human rights experts at the United Nations on June the 14th, it's very easily available, but please let us know and I'll get you a copy as quickly as I can, because it's a very, very inspiring document. I think it's fair to say that all of us in ETAC, International Coalition, are delighted that the UN Special Rapporteurs on Human Rights have issued a joint press release about the matter that has taken so much time around the world and so much misery around the world. The 12 independent experts note that they work without pay. They are independent from any government or organization. Their press release says that they are extremely alarmed by reports of alleged organ harvesting in China targeting minorities, quote, including Falun Gong practitioners, Uyghurs, Tibetans, Muslims, and Christians in detention in China, close quote. It's perhaps also important to note that the NGO Doctors Against Forced Organ Harvesting, DAFO is the acronym, years ago initiated a global petition to the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. Within 5 months, there were 1.5 million people from 50 plus countries that signed the petition as of 2013. On December the 9th of 2013, a DAFO delegation composed of 3 doctors, 3 lawyers, including David Matas, presented the petition to the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in Geneva. To this date, so many years after its presentation, DAFO has not received any response from the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. One other sea change I might note is that David Matas and I, in 2006 or 7, perhaps David, you remember which of the 2 years it was, made a presentation to the World Health Organization. They listened. The doctor we met listened to it. I forget his name. It's so long ago. But to my knowledge, nothing has happened since. But I think it's fair to say that Dr. Margaret Chan had become the head of the World Health Organization in 2006. So I think it's about 10 countries now have legislation along the lines of the proposed legislation for Canada. Canada, as David Matas pointed out, has still not succeeded in passing legislation, and I very much hope that that this will happen very quickly in the present Parliament of Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Kilgore. And we are very pleased to have 2 community groups joining us. And I would introduce Grace Wolensack, and she's from the Falun Dafa Association of Canada, and we'll be talking about the relevance of the bill to the victim group of the Falun Gong community. So please go ahead, Grace.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Maria. Okay, hello everyone. Falun Gong also known as Falun Dafa, a spiritual practice guided by the universal principles of truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. Since July 1999, for 22 years, the communist regime in China has carried out a state-sponsored, nationwide campaign of hate, torture, killings, and imprisonment, targeting tens of millions of people who practice Falun Gong. As you have heard from previous speakers, mounting evidence documented by investigators, researchers, and organizations shows that for 2 decades, the Chinese regime has been killing Falun Gong prisoners of conscience for their organs. China has no effective organ donation system. China's transplant system, which has the capacity to conduct 60,000 to 90,000 transplants per year, has been and continues to be supported by the killing of innocents. It is driven by the state, run on an industrial scale. Legal experts say crimes against humanity and genocide have occurred. International organ tourists have been a big part for the organ demand. By traveling to countries such as China for organ tourists cause the murder of human rights victims. Bill S-204 is a response in part to global proliferation of organ trafficking and the Canadian complicity in such crimes by way of organ tourism. A report by Organ Watch, which is based in California, identified transplant tourists from Canada as among the top organ buyers in the world, which highlights the increasing importance of this bill. Bill S-204 helps to save lives. Ultimately, this bill helps to lessen the number of innocent people from being killed by the Chinese communist regime and reduce the victims elsewhere. So the timely passing is critically important. On behalf of the victims, I'm calling for all MPs to support this life-saving bill to pass as quickly as possible. And thanks to the persistent efforts by many people over the past 13 years to make it reach to this stage again, and hope it will pass on June 18th. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Grace.
And be heard while the others are.
Yeah, Clive, I know you have joined, and maybe you mute yourself first, and we'll have Irene, and then I would come to your presentation. Thank you. So the next would be Dr. Irene Turpie, and Dr. Turpie is Professor Emerita at the McMaster University Department of Medicine, and she's also representative from the Canadians in Support of Refugees in Dire Need, and she'll also talk about the significance of the bill, especially from the medical point of view, from the medical community's point of view. So, Irene, please go ahead.
Hello, Maria, and everybody else, and thank you very much for letting me come and talk on this topic this afternoon, this very important topic. I'm speaking primarily as a physician. I think I told you that. And as you know, one of the fundamental principles of all medical ethics is do no harm. And that is what makes me speak out. And that is, and if we physicians do not speak out about forced organ harvesting, then we are denying the oath which we took when we graduated from medical school. And I can't speak to the niceties of the legal arguments of this bill, but I know that what this bill sets out to do is relatively modest as to what I would like to happen, but it's going to prevent anybody who has profited or participated in this forced organ harvesting business we're not going to let them come into Canada or have Canadian citizenship if they are applying for immigrant status. I think I have got it right there, and I know you lawyers will correct me if I don't. And not to, and I can't understand why the government of Canada, why the Parliament of Canada has not passed this bill already, which has been through 2 runs of Parliament unanimously. And I don't know why, and I would plead with the government of Canada, and I won't use the phrase that I would use if I wasn't on a press conference, but I would ask them to energize themselves, get up and get this bill passed. We cannot continue to see this egregious problem with medical ethics occur anywhere in the world, and for Canada in any way to participate in this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. P. Okay, so we'll come to our last speaker, Mr. Clive Ansley. Clive, you can unmute yourself. And Clive Ansley is a lawyer and Canadian human rights advocate. He has practiced law in China for 14 years. He's also International Advisory Committee and Canadian Committee of the International Coalition to End Transplant Abuse in China. So, Clive, please unmute yourself and speak.
I can't unmute myself.
We can hear you now.
Okay, all right. Maybe that's the reason then. And I'm very puzzled to find that I'm the last speaker and everybody has gone, because the time I was told was 10 o'clock my time, which I've just lost. Anyway, I won't get into that. I've had a lot of technical problems here, and I'll just get going. And I'll get going by saying that I heartily endorse what has just been said by Irene, and I think she's expressed the feelings of all of us that this is an almost unparalleled atrocity that has been ongoing over the last 12 years while Parliament seems to have been paralyzed and in contemplation of this horrendous crime has seemed to be incapable of putting something together that would get through the parliamentary process and allow us to actually vote and implement something. Now, David Matus has alluded to the fact that the only legal way of addressing these problems are in countries outside of Canada, and that's absolutely correct. In Canada, it's a criminal offense to murder anybody. It's a criminal offense to engage in organ trade, to have organ transplants that are bought and paid for. But the fact is that Canadian citizens can now legally travel abroad and arrange for the murder of Chinese citizens so that those Chinese citizens can have their organs stripped from them and can benefit Canadian organ tourists. There is no remedy, legal remedy in China. The only method of reducing the impact of these crimes and the numbers of crimes is by criminal prohibitions within Canada. China has legislation. That may surprise some people. China has all the legislation that prohibits this practice. The problem is that written statutes in China are pretty much irrelevant to the Chinese legal system. You don't find judges who really have any interest in reading the law or applying it. And the reason for that is that there is no such thing as judicial independence in China. All the courts, well, put it this way, a court in China is simply a very low-level administrative organ of the Chinese Communist Party. And it's directly under the control and the leadership of the party. And many of us have pointed that out for years and years. And only recently have we had the support of Xi Jinping on that particular point. Because for the last 4 years, Xi Jinping, the so-called president of China, or the general secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, together with Zhou Chang, who is the Chief Justice of China, have been making many, many strident public lectures stressing the fact that China will never, ever implement the so-called Western principle of judicial independence. And both the Chief Justice and Xi Jinping himself have emphasized and said specifically that the courts, the police, and the prosecution arm of the judicial system all must accept the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party and must implement the instructions of the Chinese Communist Party. Now, that is not a legal system. And the legal system in China is essentially fraudulent. The judges are simply low-ranking members of the civil service, and they are actually listed. Judges in the courts are listed as civil servants under a statute called the Civil Servant Law. So there is no possibility of either foreigners or Chinese citizens taking any legal steps in China to remedy this situation. So it won't be affected until Canada and other countries make it a crime in Canada to do overseas what can't be done in Canada today. And I think probably I'll end up, I've probably exceeded my time already, I don't know, but I'll just end up departing from the strictly legal discussion and stress again the absolute urgency of Parliament finally, after 12 years, doing something today before they let this thing die on the order paper again. Every single day that we get up and go about our business, there are countless numbers of Chinese citizens that are culled out of the herd of people who have been kept alive and fed and watered, just waiting for a computer selection, matching their tissues with somebody from a foreign country that has the money to pay $65,000 for a kidney, or I think 180 for a heart. And as soon as the blood samples and the tissue samples are matched up, then these people are culled out of the herd, taken to an operating room in a hospital, and murdered with all of their organs stripped. And that is going on a daily basis while we have our parliament saying, gee, you know what, it's really hard to get a private member's bill through. We think this is awful. We think it should be stopped. We'd like to stop it, but we can't figure out a procedural way to deal with it this year, maybe next year. And I've just seen somebody saying in the last few days, maybe we can tackle this in the fall. Well, in the fall, how many Chinese citizens who are alive right now will be dead because of this horrendous policy that our government can't seem to bring itself to.
Thank you. Thank you, Clive. Very powerful statement. we have a number of questions on the floor already. So if the speakers can click on the right-hand side Q&A box, you will see it. And I would read it out so that anyone who would like to answer that question, please go ahead. The first one, I'll go by order. Could passing the Bill 204 in any way help stop the forced organ harvesting in China?
Yes, go ahead, David.
Well, yes, I think as Clive said and David said, everybody said, Canadians are not lawbreakers, and if they knew that if they were going to China to get an organ that they would be committing an offense in Canada, I think the vast majority of people who go would stop going. And so, yes, the short answer is, and I was a prosecutor for 10 years. I'm quite convinced that this would stop virtually all Canadians going to China so that somebody can be killed so that they can have a new liver or new heart.
Yeah, well, of course I agree with that. But I would also add that, well, the bill has two components. One is the criminalization, or two major components. One is the criminalization for complicity in transplant abuse abroad, but the other is the immigration bar. And the immigration bar, of course, is going to apply to non-Canadians. It'll apply to visitors, temporary workers. And of course, it will apply to Chinese. And there's many Chinese, including Chinese complicit in organ transplant abuse, who want to come to Canada, who have come to Canada. They may come for conferences, they may come for lectures, they may come for training, and all of those people would be barred entry. So that sort of impact on the Chinese would be an incentive for them to end the abuse, and could have an impact directly on the Chinese government on ending it.
Okay.
There is also emerging evidence that people who go abroad for transplants don't actually do as well as people who stay and are cared for by our Canadian healthcare system. And one of the things passing this bill would give publicity to this, I think.
Well, yes. I mean, that's of course, in fact, true. That I mean, because this is it is an abuse that is well known within the medical profession, both in Canada and in China. What happens is when patients are going abroad for transplant in China, sometimes they won't, and I think quite rightly so, be given medical records or prescriptions because the Canadian doctors don't want to participate in it. When they come back, the Chinese doctors try to cover up what they've done, so they won't tell the patient or the after treatment doctor in Canada what the treatment was in China, what the aftercare is in China after return from China, and all the patients are left with is their own say-so of what happened, which isn't much help for aftercare when they return.
Yeah. Okay, shall we go to the next question, which is what could possibly the impact to the Chinese government by passing Bill S-204?
Yes, well, I think it does have the impact, as I indicated, about immigration. And it's also, I think, an impact that Canada and basically the rest of the world is taking their abuse seriously. I mean, what Clive Ansley said is right, that there is legislation in China which prohibits this activity, but there's also legislation in China, much older legislation, which allows this activity. And when the new legislation was enacted, the old legislation was never repealed. And in reality and practically, it's the old legislation which prevails. I mean, politically, for China, this abuse is indefensible. They can give no Communist Party ideological justification for it. And so the more it gets noticed, the more it becomes politically untenable for them to continue with it. So it would have, I think, that effect.
Thank you. I saw David also. Honourable Kilgore, you want to speak to?
I'm just going to, Maria, make the point that a few years ago when we did our update, Ethan Gutman, David Matus, and I, we estimated that the organ transplant business was bringing in about, I think it was $6 or $7 billion for the hospitals, for the pilots who fly the organs, for the surgeons, for the nurses, for all the people, for the brokers who go around trying to solicit patients in places like Canada. And this was blood money, literally, for killing innocent people, because almost all of the people who are killed for their organs are prisoners of conscience who've been convicted of no offense at all. So it's just something that takes one's mind back to the Nazi era, and one likes to think that in the 21st century that this kind of thing practice has stopped. And Canada can make a significant step to stopping it by passing this bill quickly. I might point out that when this went through the Senate, I think it took about, I was one of the witnesses, took about an hour to go through first, second, and third reading through the Senate committee. And really it should do the same thing in the House. All it takes is a little bit of political will by the House leaders, by the members, and we could have this legislation passed very, very quickly.
Can I add something to that? David Kilgore has just made a, can I say, comparison to the Nazi era, to the Third Reich, and underlying my complete puzzlement, as Irene has expressed, of why we are totally paralyzed here. I can hardly contemplate that if this were taking place, or if the Holocaust were taking place back in the 30s and 40s, and our Parliament knew about it and had the evidence in front of it and knew that it was reality, I couldn't imagine how they could take 12 years to somehow cobble together a way of coming to a vote on the issue.
Right.
Thank you, Clive.
Thank you. And how about from the Falun Dafa Association, any views about that? You have to unmute, Grace.
Yeah, I think, for any criminals or criminal offense, I think that need the people to say no. I think it's time for Canada to say no on this horrendous crimes committed by the Chinese government. It's our expression, to uphold the justice, and to uphold the Canadians' stand on this and protect our values. And so, if we people in the free country do nothing, and that just simply give a signal, a message to those perpetrators that they can do anything at will, and without any punishment, or without holding them accountable, and then the situation will be much worse. And so I like to thank all the people here in this room, and also many people who have working tirelessly in the past 15 years, especially those two Davids, really. So it is unprecedented crimes in the human history, and this has to be stopped. And I think it's way past time that for Canadian Parliament to pass this bill. Yeah.
Thank you. Anything? Okay, shall we go to the next question? It seems to be there are two questions there. The question one is, what has prevented Canada from passing this law in the past years? What has changed since the first bill to end organ harvesting was proposed to Canadian Parliament, and is it more likely for S-204 to be passed into law?
Well, the problem that we're facing is not political willingness, it's parliamentary procedure. All 6 of the bills have been private members' bills, and the government controls the overwhelming bulk of parliamentary time. And the private members' bills cannot proceed in an orderly fashion. They just end up going by lottery. And most private members' bills never get beyond the initial introduction, and because the bills just don't win the lottery. And that was what happened with the original 4 versions of the bill. And we managed, or the advocates of the bill managed to circumvent that problem by going to the Senate first, which doesn't have the same, well, the government doesn't control the Senate. And so you don't have the same blockage of parliamentary time through government control that you get in the House of Commons. And and once it passed the Senate, as it did twice, then it goes to the House of Commons. And then, of course, we got into another parliamentary procedural problem, which is that both houses have to pass the bill in the same form, and if it goes in a different form in one house to the other, then it has to be repassed, and then all bills die whenever there's an election. And of course, we've had, because of minority situations, one election after another, so the bill died once, and now it's about to die again. And the problem isn't the content of the bill, it's the fact that Parliament doesn't function properly. And this bill is an illustration of the malfunctioning of Parliament. And I would say parliamentarians, to generate some respect for their own institution, should treat this bill a lot more seriously than they have.
David's statement, which I'm glad to hear, and I think really addresses the problem basically, but it also begs the question of why, in the face of the horrendous nature of this, and the fact that people right in this meeting are making comparisons to the Holocaust, and that's what's facing our Parliament. In a situation like that, a question I have is, why in the world is this not being put forward by the government as government policy? Why is it being left to this inefficient and ineffective private members' bill process?
Well, of course, that's a very good question. Many of us are involved in several international human rights issues, and this is a common problem. And it's basically, the answer is insularity. That people are concerned about what their neighbor does, no matter how trivial, than what somebody does 1,000 miles away, no matter how serious. It's very difficult to get people generally to focus on an abuse outside of Canada, and I think that's what we're seeing here.
Okay, so shall we go with the second part? Seems like there is a second part of the question, which is Canada pursuing other actions such as the Magnitsky Law or the Magnitsky Act to end organ harvesting, and are these instruments able to work in concert?
Well, go ahead.
The problem is you can't, until we have the legislation making it a crime, it's a little hard to use the Magnitsky Act. Now, it's true that we have used the Magnitsky Act against a number of other situations, and maybe we should do this, but the trouble is that then that will probably reduce the pressure to pass this legislation if we do that. So now is to do it. There, as everybody listening to us knows, there's been a huge uproar about what China's been doing to people like the 2 Michaels, or in all kinds of ways, the most conspicuous of which is the Uyghur situation. It's just simply beyond belief that we could be forcing women to have abortions and to euthanize children in the East Turkestan part of China, so that the public mood, the world mood, as we saw at the G7 summit and the NATO summit and the Euro meetings, has turned very strongly against some of the things the government of China are doing, including this. So now is the time. Now is the time to take advantage of this change. Above all, in Canadian opinion, I've said this many times. Something like 90% of Canadians have a low view of the government of China. We're not going to get a stronger consensus on virtually any issue than that. So now is the time for Mr. Trudeau's government to realize it can no longer go on trying to be nice with the people in Beijing. They have to act in the interest of Canadian values and the things that all of us stand for, regardless of where we live in Canada. Thank you.
Yeah, of course, I agree with all that. But I would also add that the bill itself does not mention China. It's generic in nature. And for those that think, well, maybe China is an obstacle or friendship to China is an obstacle, it's much less so than the Magnitsky Act, which, of course, would specifically mention Chinese. If anybody's concerned about the reaction of the government of China, I would suggest they need not be, because the government of China probably would just say, this is not about us, it's about somebody else.
But in fairness, David, there's only one government in the world that is killing its people, prisoners of conscience, and that's the government of China. To my knowledge, 100 or 200 other countries in the world, roughly, there's only one on the face of the earth today that is doing this horrendous crime against its own people.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the reality. But of course, the Communist Party doesn't live in reality. It lives in a fantasy world.
So any other response to this question?
Well,
okay.
I would only say I don't think the Communist Party is living in a fantasy world. I think they're fairly realistic, but they're leading a system which is fundamentally based on the principle of institutionalized lying. And that's really the issue.
Yeah, okay, I agree with that.
Right. Okay, so any other response? If not, then we'll go to the last question. Oh, Grace, please go ahead.
Yes, actually, in the U.S. They have sanctioned two Chinese officials for their role in persecuting Falun Gong practitioners, by using Magnitsky law. So we really think a Canadian government, should follow the same steps, and to hold those perpetrators accountable for their crimes committed in China in many aspects, not only to Falun Gong practitioners, but to various human rights violations to the Chinese people, at large. Actually, we it's the Organ Trafficking Bill, S-204, is just one avenue, a way to to hold our Canadian values, but there's other ways. I think Magnitsky Act is certainly effective ways, and Canadian government should take.
Thank you. Excuse me. So we'll come to the last question on the list, which is, what is preventing the bill from being passed all stages by the House with a unanimous motion? Are MPs lacking courage or will?
Well, maybe I should speak to that, since I was in Parliament for 27 years. It's a wink and a nod system. that if the government doesn't want a bill to pass, then they wink and nod at their members, their particularly loyal members who will jump up and will object to something. So you have to basically go through the House Leader's office and get the House Leaders to agree too, and they will make sure that nobody will get up and object or will stand up or do the things that have to be done to stop a bill like this from passing all readings. And so I would hope that the House Leaders of all the parties in the House would not interfere, but frankly, I worry about the government House Leader who might think, oh, well, if this bill passes, the government of China will be mad at Canada or mad at Canada again, and therefore it's better not to upset them by passing this bill. But if all of us could get the word out, and of course the media can do it better than any of us, that's no longer viable for a lot of reasons that have been stated here and in many other places, then hopefully House Leaders would get on side with Canadians and Canadian values and not stop this bill from passing in this Parliament.
Any other response? We have 2 more questions.
Okay.
All right. Yes, Grace?
Actually, I had a chance to talk with my own MP, and she's a Liberal on the government side. Actually, from what she said is like, this is a bill that can and actually is getting support from all parties. This is not non-partisan because this everybody like to support such kind of bills, and so that's her feeling because she worked with Garnet Jenner's office, and they talk with different party members from Green Party, NDP, and from Bloc Québécois. And so in general sense, and she said, like apart from the political difference from our parties, and this is the ones that can get the unanimous consent. So I think the challenge is about the procedure, like whether they like to step out of their comfort zone, to just passively follow, or like they can overcome their notions of unusual way to do things. And I think if they really realize the significance of this bill, they would be able to pass, to vote yes. And so we hope that the best will happen, and we hope they will do the right thing.
Thank you, Grace. So we have another question. Is there any evidence showing who the brokers soliciting clients in Canada to do organ transplants in China are? If yes, are they connected to the CCP or its CCP organs, such as the United Front work?
When David Kilgore and I first did our report, brokerage was quite public, and there was websites, and they were commercial businesses. There was one that was advertising from Alberta, and the hospitals would advertise prices that were posted on the internet as well. I mean, obviously, it was should have been an obviously suspect business, because you could book a transplant according to your own schedule for vital organs like heart or lung or liver. So obviously, people were being killed for their organs, but you could see who these brokers were. Eventually, after our report came out, this whole business went underground. But it's still a business. It's not the party, of course, runs everything, but not necessarily up front. The party is in the background, often telling people what to do, rather than up front actually doing it. So what we saw up front was hospitals charging prices, brokers charging commission, and Some of these, I mean, the hospitals, of course, are still around, and some of the brokers are still around. It's just that they're more circumspect in the way they advertise.
Any other responses from the speakers? Okay, so we'll go for the next question. If the bill passed, does the power to bar entry rest solely on the Minister of IRCC and or CBSA?
Well, yes and no. I mean, the initial decision at a visa post abroad is made by a visa officer to grant a visa. The decision at the port of entry is made by the Canada Border Service Agency or Immigration Enforcement Officer. But any government decision is subject to judicial review in the federal court, so that the initial decision would rest with the Minister of IRCC or CBSA, but it wouldn't rest solely with them because there would be judicial review available in federal court.
Okay, thank you. Any other responses from the speakers on that or overall? Okay, so that's all I see on the Q&A list. And is there any participants? I see the number of participants has increased. Any other questions for the speakers? And if not, then I would like to thank everyone joining today. And if any participant who are reporters who want to interview any of the speakers here, you can send an email in your press advisory. There's an email that is with end organ transplant, and you can send an email request to speak with them, or maybe you can stay behind to ask more. And I would just like to end the session by thanking all the speakers. Yes?
Maria, could you just mention that there will be a video available, I believe, quite soon after the press conference? So I understand from Lindsay.
Yeah.
How they can get that?
Yeah, I see that we are being recorded, so the recording is on. So if you like to have the video clip, you can also ask for it with the same email that I mentioned in your press advisory. So as we heard from the speakers, the bill has been sitting in the Parliament for 13 years, and during which many innocent lives have been sacrificed. The moral stance is very clear. The bill can definitely save a lot of lives now. We again call for the bill to be passed in this session of the Parliament without any delay anymore. So thank you for coming. And probably the speakers will stay for a little while and see if anyone would stay behind. And I understand from Lindsay that if she unmute people, people can speak. So I don't know whether anyone would want to speak. Okay, seems it's very silent. So we will end the session today, and thank you for the speakers for joining us. So we'll talk later. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.